The Seer, Violets in the Grass by Jessica Ariel Morocco. Chapter 15. Stories of Macabre. It was a dark, rainy evening, and I felt compelled to write. The sounds of poetry began to flow through my mind. Most of my stories were full of life. I channeled the words, and this time I became surprised by the content. Immediately I felt the great beyond speaking endless words of tales that needed to be shared with those who were willing to listen. Little by little, the collection of stories were added to a list or a folder to be set aside for another rainy day. It wasn't quite clear where I would be headed, but I thought, this is something very different from what I had experienced in the past. I feel happy inside. My future looks bright. Yet these were more serious and even gruesome at times. The Druid, the Witch's Brew, Robots from Our Future, Underwood were all stories of darker content, the type of story that could curl a person's toes in suspense if accompanied by the right music and mood to set a stage of ambience. I knew this wasn't coming to my mind. This wasn't the type of fantasy writing I was accustomed to. My new writing style was poetic, yet sweet and perfect for a youthful audience. This newer style of writing sent me to a place where darkness abounds. Yes, it helps direct the reader out of the darkness and into the light. One of the first stories came at the least expected time when I was doing laundry. A voice of a man was heard. It was a deep, confident voice that was not very loud. He began to speak to me and tell me that he had a story for me. I could see him in my third eye. He was a man with shoulder-length brown hair, deep-set green or hazel eyes, who was slim but very masculine and highly confident. His clothing was from a much earlier period in time. I thought, what was he doing here? A man that clearly looked like he came from England and was persistent about sharing his story with me. I thought it was strange because typically mediumship attracts the earthbound spirits that are local. This man may be visible to most mediums near his home in England. I thought, what is he doing here? Why did he travel so far to tell his story? Maybe I'm connected to him in another way. Is it possible that I am someone he remembers? The story, Underwood, was about a man, or a being, if I can call him that, who visits women during the day while their husbands are off working. This story lacked credibility and had elements of magic, mysterious traits. I never looked deeper into the story to reveal that what my personal connection was to this story or to him. I only know that he never returned again, and I am content to read the story without any further attachment to it. The Druid and the Witch's Brew came after an Akashic reading, as did The Land of Apples, Jack the Ripper, and Catherine Howard. The story about Jack the Ripper was very unsettling because I was not searching for his information as it came to me, rather surprisingly. It was so startling, I received help from the higher beings who assisted me afterwards. I was somewhat distraught over the situation, and they knew I needed help processing this. They said to me, "We will show you who Jack the Ripper was. This is an unsolved crime." My first thoughts were, no one would believe me. The second thought was that it really didn't matter. I needed to find the truth. I needed to share it with those who needed closure. and the records of time only spoke the truth. I realized that this was not for gain, publicity, or entertainment. This was for closure and healing of an unexplained series of murders that were very chilling and heartless. The key to the answer was in the reading. The message was that the person who was the wife of Jack the Ripper had to work out his karma with this person in this current lifetime because he, or the wife, had poisoned him. After the reading, I was told to look up the suspects, and I would find out who he was according to what I saw, and specifically looking for visuals of what the house looked like and the poisoning that occurred. There I discovered the story of James Maybrick and his wife Florence, who was my client. The illumined ones came as a vision as I watched men sell their souls for power and open the door to extraterrestrial beings who have had visible influence on our planet through political control and big money. The emotionless ones were also influenced by extraterrestrial beings referred to as the Greys, as in Area 51. Two of the stories were about time travel. The story about Rupert talked about a time traveler who I encountered during a very deep meditative state. I observed him inside his bedroom as he was seated on a bed made of straw. He looked miserable and his eyes half closed. I thought I was getting a snapshot of the past, as my typical Akashic readings send me to the places of the past as they are filed in a movie. This, on the other hand, was very different from reading or a vision. I began to talk to this man in real time. I had a conversation in 2011 with a man who lived in Middle England. I'm not sure I did this, nor can I share the details of our conversation. The only part I understand is that he was looking for help. He was searching for an escape from his nagging, controlling wife. I said, well, you and many others are not happy with their spouses. That's understandable, however. How is it that we are talking right now? I am in your future, and you are in my past. He then went on to tell me he time travels, and he was looking for an escape from his wife. We didn't speak for very long, but I thought, how simple would it be for him to physically leave and be with her no longer if it was that bad? Until I discovered two things. He was the one who was Seth in the Jane Roberts books. Interestingly, I thought, that still didn't answer my question, at least not right away. Over a year had passed when I heard his voice again. I heard someone speak. Tell me a woman's name. I said, who are you? He responded and said, she is coming to you. So this woman called me up 2 months later. Immediately I knew something was wrong. My gut tightened, and the intention was not for sincere help, but for darker sort. I thought, after I hung up the phone, there is something wrong with this woman. She lacked sincerity, and what does she want? And then I heard the man's voice again. It was Rupert. I want you to take the reading. Can you help me out? What do you need from me, Rupert? I asked. You will see when she arrives. Little did I know that she came to my door to discredit me, to discover this is to be true a few days later. We began the reading, and as I had committed to be objective, I closed my eyes to any personal issues and told her what I saw. She had recently lost a lover and was searching for him through mediumship. I saw him revealed, and the eyes were very distinguishable. Then I realized that this man was Rupert. I asked, what are you doing here? And Rupert told me that He was looking for his twin flame. A twin flame? Do you mean you think it was her? He said, no, it is a man. Can you see him? And there I saw a man with brown hair who was slightly shorter than the average height. Rupert said, please tell me who this woman is. I need to know because she's still searching for me in my death. Now awakened to who he was, who he became in the future, he began to observe her soul to crack her connection to him. He was searching for his true love and was not confident it was the woman who he was now asking to be connected to him in this life. I began to see the pages of time unfold. He then said, she is the wife I am trying to get away from. This is her, my future. Why does she have such a strong hold upon me? How is it she's able to trap me into many different lifetimes, and why can't I be free? Tell her to find my twin flame, and then I'll be able to resolve what is happening. I proceeded to explain to this woman that she needed to find her old boyfriend, Rupert's twin flame. The part of his essence of who he is will be with this man. The man will be very similar to him. She was delighted and relieved because the man she loved was kind to her. Instead of searching for his twin flame, she went with another man with red hair, out of confusion or guidance from somewhere else. I found out a few days later that Rupert was able to cut himself free from her by directing her to the wrong man. I don't know what the outcome was, although it appears that he departed with a sense of contentment. What held them there together for many lifetimes may have been a spell or other type of unnatural force that interfered with the natural course of karma that violated the freedom of will. Not even the highest beings would violate this spiritual law. Some type of spiritual curse or trickery was suspected, and I believed the higher good assisted Rupert's soul to become free from something or someone who had violated the spiritual laws. In the end, this woman missed the connection, saw this man and his twin flame because of her intent, though sorrowful for her loss, had ill intentions toward me in the beginning and the darkest desire to control another human being. What she hadn't considered was that she did this boldly before the higher beings of light. Nothing terrible happened other than I am certain that she will not experience any real peace and joy until she makes things right. The challenges of learning forgiveness and being objective is something that we all need to aspire to. However, I acknowledge my human side that is honest and true about what comes from my heart. The seer is not always perfect. We have emotions and feelings of every human attribute. I don't believe anyone who claims to walk in a level of being so pure that they don't have a bad thought. I don't think this is humanly possible. I will let the gods claim those attributes. As for me, I learn when I need to learn and trust that there is a higher good in all my experiences that may help redirect my path to something better. Another story from Macabre was about a group of elves from Middle Earth. We go from Middle England to Middle Earth. This story is called The Gotlanders. I thought this story would be for children at first. Then the darkness and turns and twists of the plot made me feel that this might be a better fit for adults. I was somewhat amused by the story since it talked about the other beings who reside in the Earth's atmosphere and were intended to care for the Earth. Little did I know much more would be revealed about these beings during a series of readings and the deeper nightmares attached to it. I could see them when I was writing these stories. I was guided to the island where they said that they lived at one time. These were the same beings that were referred to as the Tuatha. Unlike the typical Fae, they had an elegance and beauty quite similar to the human race. As I began to dig deeper, I discovered that they were the Aryans, the beings who had guided the Nordic and Germanic tribes. They had a strength of magic and were able to organize and etch out a land base within the northern hemisphere of the world. Despite their power, there was an anger and resistance that I couldn't quite figure out. I knew they were not happy, and their stoic stares into the horizon gave me a chill. They were determined to win and become steadfast in their efforts. My question to them was, what is it that you are trying to win? What is your anger caused from? Is the story the Gotlanders? They gave me a snapshot of another being named Pan, who had made them miserable in a form of deception and continual harassment. They get trapped into the Middle Earth and cannot leave for many years. If this is true, then it all happened in another dimensional realities that parallel or current existence. The question is, how do other dimensional existences affect our physical plane of existence? A few years ago, I had a clear vision of a man who came from Middle Earth. He resembled a long-haired albino because he was so fair that his hair was so blonde that it was white. His eyes were blue and he had a masculine, muscular build. He would appear to me randomly, looking at me and not saying a whole lot. I knew he was not human, but was very familiar with our existence, and if he lived amongst us along with some of his people. This is how I was able to piece this story together and make all the connections. I knew he was in a lot of pain and somehow looking to me to resolve whatever it was. I thought, why do these beings come to me? I'm merely human, and it is obvious that they have power. It is as if I hold a key to solving and resolving their problems. Here is a sequence of events. In 2009, I wrote the story about the Gotlanders. I had my first visitation of him during a vision in the fall of 2010. He would come to visit me many times after to just say hello and not necessarily ask me for anything. His demeanor was cool and relaxed, but his eyes were telling me another story in the form of telepathy. In 2012, I had a reading that changed everything. There was a client of mine who came and asked me to help her understand her past lives and was searching for some answers. Knowing that she had a type of mischief in her, I quickly realized that she was somehow connected to the Fae as a sprite, pixie, or one of the wee folk. We already had a few readings done earlier, and the next reading would deal with her possible connection to the famous Romanov family in Russia that got brutally murdered by the Bolshevik Party. The entire family was murdered, including Anastasia, who was believed by some to have somehow escaped and survived the brutal gunshots from the soldiers. In my visions, I saw the soul of Anastasia shattered like a piece of glass that fell to the floor. The shattered pieces hovered over the earth, and another woman who was living in an insane asylum became an open vessel for a soul piece that no longer had a body to fill. This, therefore, took on the identity of Anastasia, as did others in a much lesser degree, who opened themselves up to this severely traumatized soul who could not find the light. Anastasia did die by the hands of the soldiers, and she incarnated many lifetimes with a sense of trauma. I believe that Anastasia was also the well-known Anne Frank, the journal writer during the World War II persecution of the Jews in Germany. The question was, who is Anastasia, and why did this happen to her soul at such a dramatic level? The mystery finally began to unravel when the reading opened up in a space of reality that tied it all together. I can see in this woman's Akashic record that she was dancing very whimsically with a bunch of girls inside the castle where the royal family lived. I could see her sick brother, who was highly anemic and didn't go outside to play very much. The impish Anastasia was a delight to her family and all who knew her. She had her challenges with her siblings, as all children do, but seemed quite normal. Circumstance seemed to have a feeling of a dark cloud over it. The family seemed mild and even-tempered, but the atmosphere had a sense of foreboding. The tension of the Russian masses was immense as they felt discontentment and the lack of the basic essentials of life, such as food and shelter. The French experienced something similar to this during the French Revolution, and the starving, depleted people of France called out for rebellion. Most governments have dealt with the curses of famine, poverty, and the challenges of feeding many mouths during the droughts and many other natural disasters or resources. What happened here was typical of any nation unable to please and satisfy their people with the basics of life. This was understandable. However, I kept asking myself why it felt so dark and menacing above and beyond these issues. Then the scene changed, and I could see the Aryans, or Gotlanders, standing within a small group during a conversation. I could see what appeared to be Merlin and a small sprite or pixie. They were observing the Aryans through a dimensional portal that looked like a cloud. The pixie was directed by Merlin to enter the space unwittingly and perform a task that would prove to be disastrous to the human race. There, the small sprite, a pixie who was 2 or 3 feet tall, began to dance and amuse the group of Aryan men. Beside these men was a large rock that had a crystal-looking device of great importance to them. This device enabled them to travel back to their homeland, since they were merely visitors on this planet. Being as powerful as they were, they never imagined that this silly childlike sprite would harm them in any way, until she quickly snatched up the device and ran to Merlin, who helped her escape through the portal. The Gotlanders, or Aryans, became trapped in the Middle Earth plane and demanded that their device be returned. To their dismay, it was kept well hidden for hundreds of years or more. The search for the device that enabled them to travel back to their homeland was devastating, and the Aryans became embittered, causing wars throughout the Middle Earth. And they tried to force Merlin to release the device back to them. It may even appear that this was Merlin's true intention, to keep the earth in illusion and warfare, as so humankind will become too confused and full of problems to connect to their higher good. The Aryans searched for the device and began tracking down the whereabouts of the pixie who assisted Merlin that day. She ended up incarnating as Anastasia Romanoff, and they were not able to find the device around her. But their influence on the Bolsheviks created a shaking that ended with the shattering of her soul. The trauma would be connected to her soul until she resolved her other dimensional karmic issues with her incarnation as a pixie, and the theft that shook many nations. Though she was merely a pawn in the mastermind of Merlin, she had a level of accountability that needed to be resolved. Many lifetimes later, she arrives in my life, and here we are seated in my living room discussing her many challenges. I performed a soul retrieval, and she became more whole. The next part of the challenge was to find the missing device. I could see the blonde-haired Aryan near me awaiting the information he had long searched for. As the story began to unravel, and she clearly didn't remember any of it, but could see some distinct personality traits, she sat there patiently while I observed what I could. Suddenly, in the blink of an eye, I could see one of the Aryans reach down into her hair as she sat waiting for me to talk. I watched him pluck out a small crystal, very, very small, as they held it between his 2 fingers. The device was found, and they thanked me. She was relieved and set free. The nightmare was now over, as the Aryans could release themselves from the earth plane and return home. I prayed for peace that day and prayed that the Aryans would no longer influence any more wars on our planet. I prayed for Anastasia to have peace and total healing from this very old trauma. Another piece of this story unraveled months later. The pixie, Anastasia, who helped Merlin, was originally Nivienne, Nimue, or Lady of the Lake. According to another vision or guided meditation, Anastasia was awakened by a vision that revealed her connection to Avalon and the mystery of what happened between her and Merlin. She discovered that she was Nimue, or Nivienne, or some might have known her as the Lady of the Lake. Merlin was angry at Nivienne because she rejected his romantic advances and he turned her into a pixie. Merlin went on to inform her that she could not return to her original state as a priestess unless she helped him perform this task of trickery on the Aryans. Soon after the task was complete, Nivienne was returned to her original state as a priestess. However, she was too powerful in this lifetime, having access to many forms of illusions and easily capable of hiding her identity from the Aryans. It wouldn't be until much later in that time that the Aryans discover her in the incarnation of Anastasia, in the present incarnation today where she is also named Anastasia. Merlin, he was the cause of the horrible illusion around King Arthur's court and his many followers. He destroyed the very people he raised up, such as Arthur and the knights. He was also to blame for the confusion among the British quarrels during the War of the Roses. But who was this Merlin? Was he the devil or the leader of a satanic rule? Not necessarily. There are others who have taken on roles of darkness for us to choose. Okay, so this is chapter 15, and I kind of do an overview of my first book that I had published, which is the stories of Macabre, short stories and poems from the other side. And those stories were given to me by Edgar Allan Poe. And the reason why I probably should have put the name Edgar Allan Poe somewhere on the book, but I never did. And I don't know if it was because I was apprehensive, because I sort of found out who was giving me the messages after all the stories came out. But this sort of opened up a whole bunch of information during that time. I was doing a lot of personal work and a lot of work with others. And so, I started to gain insights and not necessarily looking for any particular specific event in history, but ironically, the people that were around me were actually having a connection to these different things. And so it kept opening up these different doors. And my experience with mediumship and really being open and kind of communicating on a level that I started to observe rather than try to ignore as I did earlier in my life, because I didn't understand what the visions were, or didn't want to deal with them actually, because you sort of want to be present, being present in life and enjoying whatever's going on at the time, distracted by, personal life and work and school and whatever else I had gone through prior to that time. And of course, having a child as well keeps you busy. So, all these things sort of opened up, and I start naming all the different stories from the Macabre book, and I get into, this. It gets a little convoluted when it comes to Rupert, because Rupert's very complex, and I saw him so clearly. It's like amazing how clear and the communication was. And then later on, I discovered that he was actually involved with the whole the Jane Roberts stories and his connection to Jane. And then I also further discovered that he was Metis from the Andronicus transmissions. And so this information just keeps coming through, and some of the same players show up, even further in time, as I begin to discover more and more. And so, going through all of this, it brings me to what's extremely timely. Now, I didn't plan this, and I wasn't thinking about it at all. But it's as if these stories, I'm sharing each chapter at a time. It's been a while before I shared this last one. And ironically, we're looking at the discussion of the Bolsheviks and the whole royal family from Russia, which, collapsed because of this Bolshevik group. And I could see that the United States and other nations, many nations, are going through this really strange, I won't call it a reformation, but kind of the collapsing of the way that things were and certain dynasties, and people sort of trying to take it back, but it's so convoluted that I'm not really sure what the aim is. It seems like it's multi-agended. And in this case, there was a definite insistence on communism, and also, seeing the threat of communism coming through with Antifa throughout the world, and, a push for the same energy that we're looking at during the story of Anastasia. So we start to examine this a bit, and I see that this information is still open, and the story of the pixie and Merlin, projecting through time and space. And many people have seen Merlin or experienced him, and there is this land of the wizards that I've seen as an off-world kind of ET group, and they're quite interesting. But some, of course, they can also be manipulative and, playing around a bit with our reality for whatever gain there was. And I also talk about the Gotlanders, and the Gotland is a small island off of Sweden, and they look like Elven. They definitely look like Elven, and they were telling me that they were connected to the Aryan. According to my understanding is, and people have their perceived notions. There, of course, if you go all the way back to ancient Sanskrit and some of the early Vedic teachings and Hinduism, and you'll see all the symbology that the Aryans took on, during the ones that you see regarding the German military World War II, but this is more of a group. Well, could possibly be the group that relates to Lyra, and as I was told, there is a location there called Arran. It's not Aryan, it's Arran, and this is where these off-world beings come from. So you have as an extraterrestrial groups intermingling with our experience, and whenever they do that, it gets very tricky. There's usually illusions and different types of information. And here's this device that the Elven had and the Gotlanders that they were looking for, and it turned out that Merlin tried to take it and then use it for something else. And so then, then it becomes a little confusing as to, who is doing what, because if there's a signature trait or ability or a device that, brings in a certain type of energy on the planet, any type of off-world councils, I'd say councils, would be the ones who would see the behavior of something to be able to identify which group was doing something. But if one group stole from another group a certain type of device, and it could make it look like that other group was doing it, but in fact it was one that stole the device that was doing it, and so it becomes there's a confusion of who to blame and who's responsible for what had happened. And so it's that sort of thing that goes on, and the earth becomes, and has been for a very long time, a playground for many off-world beings or interdimensional beings or alternate beings, because they come from all different locations. And then they contribute and do all their different things, and some of them are very helpful, but then, it's can be a double-edged sword where they're harming at the same time. And so that's another one of those incidences. So, and in the end, I said, is Merlin evil? Is he a devil? Is he, there's a lot of different beings that have done things. I can't say one is more evil than the other. I'd say whether you want to call it mischief, confusion, but somehow humans end up taking the brunt of it. So even what we're experiencing now with some of these governments and upheavals and protests, a lot of this is being influenced. And if we could step back and identify who the groups are that are influencing these problems, manipulating people into have certain types of thoughts of whether it's hate crimes or entitlements, whatever the accusations are, have been fueled, have been inserted in ideas and thoughts to create division, to distract us. And then there's a greater agenda. And so, as I said, I probably couldn't have timed this any more perfectly. It's an old game. We've been involved in it for quite some time, but it turns out that this chapter in my book, which I thought was just an overview of a conscious stream of thought of how all these different things fit together, and then coming up at this exact time in history where it's June 14th, 2020, and all of these different things happening around the world. I couldn't have planned it any differently. So here is this chapter 15. So the last thoughts, continue listening. We have a few more chapters ahead, and I guess they'll come out at the right time when they're supposed to be revealed. Thank you.